And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou. Originally called the Northwest Mounted Police, RCMP members have been keeping the laws since 1870 when Sir John A. Macdonald formed a paramilitary force of mounted police to establish law and order. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1990.
Day and night, weekdays and weekends, RCMP members across the Northwest respond to calls and patrol the streets on the lookout for anything suspicious. And sometimes a routine check can turn into the unexpected.
So the fact that he's driving without his headlights on, there's always a possibility that there might be more than what meets the eye. Terrace 20, Charlie 3.
Charlie 3, go ahead.
1069.
Go ahead.
20, Charlie 3, 1069. Victor X-ray Romeo, 280 by the Bavarian.
What's
20 Charlie 3, back up, please. Stick with the car.
Corporal Gary Moritz has been with the force for 20 years. For the past 2 years, he's been working in Terrace, keeping the peace and trying to get criminals off the streets, sometimes bringing them here to the cells at the Terrace detachment. Most of us will never see a jail cell, and one glance at the sparse, dingy spaces is enough to convince us we never want to be in one. But it seems not everyone thinks that way, and Moritz says all too often, visitors frequently return.
I've seen them where I've charged them, we went to trial, they've been convicted, and within 2 days they're back in here. We're getting more repeat offenders, I think, than, at least I am personally dealing with more repeat offenders than I've ever dealt with.
Moritz worked in Prince Rupert from 1979 to 1983, so he's familiar with life in the Northwest and its people. He's very familiar with some of its people.
You actually are watching the kids grow up. The kids that I were dealing with in Prince Rupert, I'm not dealing with them as adults here.
But that's just part of the job, as is dealing with young offenders, drunks, and family violence. But Moritz doesn't let himself get discouraged as he heads out to patrol the streets of Terrace.
So we'll go out and hit the road and see what's happening in town.
The best part of the job for this corporal is dealing with the people and the variety of the work, never knowing what situation will crop up during a 12-hour shift.
Well, the challenge of not knowing what's ahead in the next 12-hour shift that you're going to be working, what's going to happen, how you're going to deal with it, and sometimes you can get fairly personal with people, like you can feel very comfortable with them. It's not like just saying hello, goodbye, you stop, you talk to them for a few minutes. It's just like when you deal with a person, whether it be for a B&E or they've been assaulted or maybe they've just been stopped for speeding. You know, you can, I like to take a few minutes to talk to them, just to let them know I'm not just out there to be a monster. Certainly I have a job to do, you know, I'm here to make sure that the laws of the land are adhered to, and that's my primary function. I'm an enforcer of the law. Good evening, ma'am. You seem to make a wide right-hand turn from when you turn from Emerson on to Lake L, so I just thought I'd see what's happening.
I'm fine.
Are you fine?
Yeah, I just got off.
Although most people aren't too happy to get a traffic ticket, Moritz doesn't see it as a negative thing, but rather a form of accident prevention.
Do you feel bad when you're writing tickets?
No. I feel I'm doing the majority of people a service. Quite often they don't see it that way. But if I'm giving them a ticket for speeding, hopefully that's going to slow them down in the future. And if I give them a ticket for, well, just about any ticket, let's say jumping a stop sign, hopefully now they'll become a little more alert to their driving, and they can work on their driving habits. Yeah, I think some people would probably describe me as perhaps a big monster with no feelings, but really that's not an accurate description. The people that are usually thinking that way are, if you picked out the majority that would be thinking that way, are the ones that perhaps you've just given a ticket to. So you're a monster strictly because they're probably sitting there with a $75 ticket in their hand, and all they see is this guy gave me the ticket, and there can't be anything good about it. But that's not the case.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. While many of us have silently cursed the cops for issuing us a speeding ticket, RCMP members are frequently hit with verbal and sometimes physical abuse. Let us return to the archives with RCMP psychologist, Dr. Ed Kramer.
One of the differences with policing is that it's largely a people-focused activity. And some of the research clearly indicates that dealing with people is perhaps more stressful over the long run than dealing with, say, a job like machining. Now, I'm not entirely sure that means that machining isn't stressful, but there is clearly some evidence that people-oriented jobs are more stressful in general. And then there is additional factors. I mean, some of what police do or a lot of what police do is resolve conflicts. So it's not like maybe a teacher, for example, resolves conflict, but not 100% of the time. Whereas a police officer's job is virtually 100% of the time to resolve conflict. And conflict tends to be fairly stressful. It's not, most people aren't laughing at that point.
Okay, just over to the right here, sir. We got a police car waiting for you.
Okay.
Okay? We'll give you a place to sleep for the night.
Oh, yeah. So where's the line?
The line is, you're drunk in a public place. You're under arrest.
No way.
You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay.
Hey. Let me
Okay.
walk the line. God damn.
While on the night shift, alcohol plays a major role in calls the RCMP respond to.
It takes a little bit more patience, perhaps, to deal with a person who's been drinking. And in a lot of cases on a night shift, you're dealing with a person who's been drinking for a considerable amount of time and has a fair bit of alcohol to drink. So he's perhaps not as easy to reason with as he would be perhaps if he was sober.
Whether it's someone drunk in a public place, a domestic dispute where alcohol is a contributing factor, a motor vehicle accident, or a possible impaired driver.
In a matter of about a 1 kilometer distance, I observed you on 2 occasions to cross over the center line of Kale Lake Drive. Okay, can I get you to step out of your vehicle for a minute? I'd like you to do a sobriety test for me if you don't mind.
Some patrol vehicles have roadside screening devices. The device establishes if someone has been drinking and should take a breathalyzer test.
I'm going to require you to supply a sample of your breath into a roadside screening device. This is a device we're bringing with us on the road. It's not a breathalyzer test.
No?
It will establish for me if you have been drinking,
Okay.
and may establish if you have to go for a breathalyzer test or not. You understand that? Okay, if you blow into this, the green light lights up, you're going to be able to carry on your journey. The yellow light will indicate to me that there is alcohol in your system,
Okay.
sufficient for me to suspend your license for 24 hours, okay?
Yep.
If the red light lights up, I have reason to believe that your blood alcohol level exceeds 90 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood, okay?
Okay.
Go ahead. Real hard, keep going.
This driver passes the test and is sent on his way.
Okay, you're free to carry on your journey home, sir. Have a
Okay.
safe journey. Get home and get a good night's sleep, okay? Good night now.
If a driver is suspected of having a blood alcohol content exceeding .08, He's taken back to the detachment and asked to provide samples of breath.
They have to be suitable to my satisfaction. So if he just gives it a quick, okay, obviously not satisfactory. I need a sample of deep lung air. So he's going to have to supply a suitable sample. If he doesn't supply that suitable sample, or he refuses, period, he will then be charged with failing to supply a suitable sample or refusing to supply samples of breath. So when he comes in, if he's facing an impaired driving charge, he will now be facing 2 if he doesn't blow. He now has 2 criminal code charges to deal with. Okay. If he blows into the instrument and the reading is under 0.8, obviously he's going to be released and perhaps no charges laid if there's no sufficient evidence to proceed via impaired driving, for example.
Even after years of counterattack programs and public education, the RCMP frequently encounter impaired drivers.
I think for the most part, obviously we miss a lot of people. One thing I've noticed about life in the north, it seems to be more prevalent up here, the alcohol abuse and the impaired driving and whatnot. There's always never any shortage of that type of work.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Choosing a career is one of the most important decisions in every individual's life. Choosing a career that isn't a one-time decision, but a continuous series of decisions you make according to plans and goals you set out for yourself. Let us return to the archives with Corporal Don Can.
One of the most influencing factors that happened in my life when I was 16 years of age, a buddy of mine in Regina was killed after work one night by an impaired driver. He was riding his motorcycle home from, I think he was working at one of those hamburger stands, you know, they're open till 3 in the morning. And he pulled out of the parking lot and an impaired driver came up behind him. He was on a motorcycle and he hit this buddy of mine, and my buddy was killed. And that's always kind of stuck in my mind. It's one of the reasons for being in the job that I'm in. It's one way that I have to hopefully prevent occurrences like that happening in other people's lives by trying to keep impaired drivers and dangerous drivers off the road.
Cam says it's the variety of the job that keeps him going to work every day.
First and foremost would be the variety. You start every shift, and every shift is going to be totally different. You never know from one minute to the next what's going to happen. And that's more again from the reactive point of view. There's always something to do. It's always busy, so...
D3, Charlie 3.
Go ahead.
Are you on your way down here?
How far?
Whereabouts are you?
Lake Else and Ottawa.
Ford, he got away on me, but he's on a bicycle currently.
Any description on him?
Yeah, 10-4, about 19 years old, native, shoulder-length brown hair. He's riding a white bicycle. He's got blue jeans and a dirty white shirt.
10-4. What was his last direction of travel?
No idea. He was gone on arrival.
10-4.
Cam likes dealing with the people he comes across every day, but repeated contact with some people, sometimes for the same offense, can be frustrating and discouraging.
Certainly you feel at times when you keep picking up the same people, for instance, night after night after night, that haven't learned anything from their contact before with the courts or the justice system. You tend to shake your head and say, what's the point in all of this? But like I say, you keep going back to what your original reasons were, at least I do. Go back to my original reasons for joining the force, and as I stated before, it's to hopefully improve the community that we live in by upholding the laws that our justice system have developed over the years.
Because they constantly deal with conflict, it's not unknown for RCMP members to find themselves in life-threatening situations. Don Can was recently involved in a high-speed chase in Terrace, but he considers the risk of losing his life just part of the job.
I think things like that tend to bring things into a little sharper focus. You get a little fuzzy after a while of dealing with the mundane, routine things, and when you get something that's serious and the potential is there for harm, it brings back into focus some of the ideals that perhaps got a little gray over the years. It brings back the important things in life. Makes you appreciate your family and appreciate the country that you live in and all of those things.
By doing his part for justice, Can makes the community safer for the people who live here, including his family. And they're the reason he finds the worst part of the job, responding to trauma situations.
Probably the worst thing on the job would be having to notify people of deaths or illnesses or whatever in the family. That's the hardest thing to deal with, as well as anything dealing with young children where they've been injured or abused or, for any number of reasons. Those are always difficult to deal with.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. In this final segment of Open Connection, let us return to the archives with RCMP psychologist Dr. Ed Kramer.
What's mandatory is that the person come to the door, but you can't make treatment or counseling mandatory. The person should always be given the right to a choice, because it'd be the same as saying, well, gee, I think your appendix should come out because I think everybody's appendix should come out, and it's now mandatory that everybody experiences surgery. That just can't be. It always has to be voluntary. But we do make it mandatory that some intervention occurs and every attempt is made for the person to have the resources or support. Virtually no one refuses.
They give us a little dose.
Can thinks the sessions and counseling are a good idea, especially during a member's early years on the force. After dealing with traumatic situations for 17 years, Can says he's built up a kind of immune system to avoid what he calls getting his insides chewed out.
I'm not saying that you become emotionally detached, but just by very nature of the work, you realize from past experience that it's a cycle that will never be broken, that it will always be ongoing, there'll always be a requirement for police intervention. If you adopt that kind of an attitude, you quickly get to the point where you realize that it's not worth having your insides chewed out because of it. You just deal with it.
RCMP members routinely deal with violent, confrontational situations, death, injury, and abuse. But behind the uniform, members are also part of civilian life. And when a shift ends, they become wives, mothers, husbands, and fathers. Some members have trouble making the switch from police officer to parent, and Kramer says it's even more difficult when a member works in a small town, where anonymity is nearly impossible in a high-profile position.
He's been out till, I guess, the 2 days, 2 nights, and that's 12 hours. That means for 4 days you really don't have very much time for your family, and you've been focused on work a great deal. Then you come home, and now you have to make a shift to the family for 4 days. Some people can make the shift, and others find it very difficult. I think the shift is harder in a small town where your behavior is always being monitored even when you're off duty, because it reminds you you're a police officer, than it would be in a large city where you go home, nobody knows really who you are. You go downtown Vancouver, nobody knows who you were from anybody.
Don Can finds it easy to swing from officer to family man, and partly attributes that to an understanding family.
I've never experienced any real problems that way. I think it helps having a sounding board at home. It helps that my children understand the nature of my job as well, and I really don't let it affect me that much when I get back to my residence and into my home life, because that's my my personal domain where I don't let these experiences on the job encroach on that. I cherish my time at home with my kids.
Members are uprooted every few years and posted to a new detachment. That could be clear across the country, and that can be tough on the family.
Well, the first move was a little difficult on them. It was a change. Actually, the first two moves, it would be from Call River to Trail and Trail to Kamloops. They were in such short succession, and right at the time when they were starting school. It was difficult for them. I think both of them they're better people for it now, looking back on the experience, but at the time it was tough.
Police officers traditionally have a reputation of keeping amongst themselves, socializing within a closed circle. Policing is a high-profile position. Members are constantly in contact with the public. All of us have been through some kind of roadblock, be it a seatbelt check or a counterattack roadblock. The members are also visible as they cruise the streets. Because they're constantly in the public eye, it's easier for them to be around people who share that experience.
If you say something that could be misinterpreted, it's a whole lot more interesting if it comes from a police officer than if it came from the real estate agent. He bears a great deal of responsibility in terms of keeping order and collecting evidence and presenting that in court, and must present a credible image and a consistent image in order for that to be effective from a law enforcement point of view. And he must be more careful what he says. And that means he's more likely to say other things to others who understand the same problem. And therefore, he's going to more likely associate with other police.
When policemen get together, we don't talk police work. That whenever we go out socially with the general public, and of course the topic of conversation always comes around to policemen. The majority of the people have only had contact with policemen in relation to a traffic ticket or some what you might call negative influence that they've had on their life. And you know, they always tend to be philosophers at social gatherings about the law and what they think is wrong with the law and the police officer's part in the law. And I think generally speaking, members would just as soon stay away from that kind of conversation on their off hours. We get enough of real life on the job. We don't need it on our off hours too.
While they face the stigma attached to the uniform, cope with death, abuse, and violence, and try to separate work and home, RCMP members like Don Can and Gary Morris continue to try and keep our communities safe, determined to win the battle against crime.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.